Well, the president promised action against social media bias, and he's delivering. An executive order that's being drafted would take away certain liability protections that are provided to companies like Twitter, Facebook, and Google that are detailed in Section 230 of the Communications Decency Act. The law basically says that because they are platforms, they are not liable for what gets put on there, right? You put what you want on, someone else puts on theirs. That's how it's supposed to roll. But since that's not what's been going on and they're editing all of this, the president is saying that you don't get those protection. Makes total sense. So he actually found an interesting ally in this battle. You got to listen to this.
We have a different policy, I think, than Twitter on this. I just believe strongly that that Facebook shouldn't be the arbiter of truth of everything that people say online. I think in general, private companies probably shouldn't be, or especially these platform companies shouldn't be in the position of doing that.
Well, who would have thought that that would have happened? That was Facebook's Mark Zuckerberg. And obviously his comments didn't go sit well with Jack Dorsey, the head of Twitter. So we'll get into all of that in a moment. Let's bring in our company to talk all of it. Michael Knowles, host of The Michael Knowles Show, and Jessica DeLoach, Democratic strategist and former Pete for America strategist. Guys, welcome.
Hey.
Thanks for having us.
Okay, this is really interesting what's going on here, because for a long time, these companies have argued we're just a platform, people can put things on it, and we don't edit it and we don't do anything, so therefore you can't sue us. Well, if they're going to act like what they're doing now in terms of editing it and, quote, fact-checking it, they need to be treated like a publisher. Michael, how big is this, what the president's doing?
What he's doing is long overdue. It's very important. And I think Section 230 of the CDA is a good place to start. Senator Cruz has been talking about using the Communications Decency Act to enforce this kind of change for a while now. But ultimately, I don't think that the question boils down to our interpretation of a 20 or 30-year-old law. I guess it's helpful to start thinking about it. But really what we have to ask ourselves is, are we, the people, comfortable having a handful of small big tech billionaires controlling the flow of information around the internet, particularly in an election year? I don't think anybody's very happy with that idea, and I'm pleased to see that Mark Zuckerberg is acknowledging the great moral hazard that would come with that sort of a situation, and something, whether it's through Section 230 or not, something has to be done to address that, because I don't want that power concentrated, whether or not it's concentrated in the government or elsewhere.
Jessica, the issue, right, comes down to calling balls and strikes, if you will, which is they're starting to get into the game of quote unquote fact checking. Yesterday, when they fact checked the president's tweet, the link went to an article on CNN. That's not fact checking. That's just doing this. The thing that was interesting to me, I want to show you a tweet that Jack Dorsey, the head of Twitter, put out that I found particularly interesting because I felt like it was a sleight of hand. He says, there is someone ultimately accountable for our actions as our company, and that's me. Please leave our employees out of this. And he's saying this because people were attacking the head of integrity, which Lindsay and I talked about yesterday. But let me go on here. He says, we'll continue to point out incorrect or disputed information about elections globally. That's the thing that I thought was really interesting, Jessica. It went from saying, hey, if something's blatantly false, we're going to get into now disputed information. I would argue that the whole point of an election is there's a dispute over this policy versus that policy, this candidate over that policy, and if that candidate. And if they get into settling disputes, then that's determining who wins and who loses.
Yeah, this is a really interesting argument, and I love it. I mean, I don't love it because it exists. I love it because it's high time we've had this conversation. You know, I don't want any company policing anyone's free speech, but I also don't want people to misunderstand the boundaries of free speech. So this is a private company. They can do what they want with their company, and the decisions they make can ultimately cause them to lose consumers. So, or people who interact with this source. So, you know, for instance, President Trump tweets something inflammatory. Well, if the policy now is that there's going to be a link attached to each of his tweets saying, go and educate yourself here, that's a lot of work for just one person. And how do you determine who's eligible to have that sort of quote unquote fact checking underneath what they say? I think that this is a heavy, heavy lift for any company, which if I were Mark Zuckerberg, I wouldn't want to do this. Again, private companies need to know their boundaries, but also too, I think that there's some confusion here because Donald Trump is the first president to utilize Twitter the way it's being used now by an elected official.
Yeah.
And not only that, he's our president. So all of this is very interesting and it's very new, and people are having to adjust their expectations. If anything, I think that a lot of this comes down to people mixing up the difference between having a president who is engaging in political tactics, who knows very easily or how easily and well to how to emote for people and how to capture an audience. Other people take issue with that because if something is being said that is not true, then they want to hold the company accountable instead of the person. So let's say that President Trump's team gets what they want with this executive order. Well, then that doesn't mean that they wouldn't be held accountable still for what they're saying. This is all such a mess. It's such a mess. And these companies, their importance is so overstated.
Yeah, and it's definitely a slippery slope for these companies as well. And like you said, Jessica, a heavy burden for them to bear. Jack Dorsey also tweeted this. He says, "This does not make us an arbiter of truth. Our intention is to connect the dots of conflicting statements and show the information in dispute so people can judge for themselves. More transparency from us is the critical so folks can clearly see the why behind our actions." Okay, well, I think an interesting point to all this, Michael, is when you are on Twitter, why do you follow certain people? Because you want to get information from them and maybe not from other people. So now Twitter is putting themselves in the boat of saying, well, we'll choose who you get to follow. We'll choose what facts you get to see and what you don't. And isn't that one of the whole points of the platform in the first point, and free expression, which that is taking that away too?
And just coincidentally, they're going to start enforcing this for the first time just months before a presidential election. It's a little too coincidental for my liking. What's kind of funny here is that Twitter decided to launch this fact check, which isn't really a fact check. That's a term that's used to infuse leftist opinion when conservatives make a point in the other direction. They chose to do it on this point that Trump made, which actually was correct. The point Trump was making on the presence of voter fraud in mail-in ballots does happen. We've seen it in just the past few days. And Twitter's fact check was wrong. But what's funny is they did it at the same time that the president was accusing Joe Scarborough of murder. They didn't fact check that because that's a sort of sideshow to the actual issue, which is that the left is trying to push through pretty significant changes to our electoral system right before the election. They don't want conservatives fighting back against that. I think Mark Zuckerberg is a much wiser CEO here. He realizes that, unlike Jessica, as you just said, that people can start their own companies if they don't like what Twitter's doing.
I think we have a little bit of a technical problem there with Michael. But Jessica, the thing that I think is so interesting is that these companies are using the issue for me, and I agree with you, it's a very slippery slope. It's very interesting. But the reality is if you're going to use the protections of the law by claiming to be one thing, i.e. we're just a platform, which is what Facebook, and I think that's what Zuckerberg was doing, then you can't say, well, we're going to edit you at the same time, because then that's not earned it. So I totally agree. I think your point was well made. And I think all next week, we are going to have this discussion really going in and out, because what you said was fascinating. We could go on and on talking about these issues. There's just so many holes to go down in terms of the law, the protections, this private company versus, public platform. So, I look forward to continuing this conversation, and thank you for sharing your thoughts.
Yeah, thanks.
All right. Well, like Sean just mentioned, we hope that you join us next week for our special series, Blocked and Banned, Social Media Censorship of the Right. It will be a week-long series about big tech's attempt to silence conservative voices. We'll be talking to FCC Commissioner Brendan Carr about this Section 230 that we've been mentioning and the argument of platform versus publisher. And we'll get the expert legal analyst from Harvard Law Professor Alan Dershowitz about talking about the free speech. You'll also hear stories from conservatives and organizations that had their posts or their videos taken down. People like PragerU CEO Marissa Streit and pro-life advocate Lila Rose.
All right. Well, if you are listening to Chris Salcedo coming into the show, you know that we have a big announcement. I am thrilled to announce that next week we will be sitting down with the President of the United States. We will go over a lot of this stuff. It's going to be a really fun interview. If you're interested in finding out all the details of it, please text Trump, the name Trump, to 39747. That's Trump to 39747. And we'll make sure you get all the details on when the interview is going to air. This is going to be really exciting to get his take on all of this. But in the meantime, coming up, we got our good guys. Stick with us.